A paranoid billionaire locked away $200 million and forgot the code, then mocked a 10-year-old black child for claiming he could open it. 60 seconds later, the vault swung wide, and everything Wells Stevenson had built came crashing down around him. Welcome back, my beautiful family. Before we begin, please click subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more thrilling stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's get into the story. The study smelled of expensive whiskey and desperation. Wells Stevenson stood before the gleaming titanium safe embedded in his mansion's west wall, his silk shirt rumpled, his face flushed with 6 days of mounting panic. The device had cost him $300,000, a custom-built fortress designed by a Swiss firm that served dictators and Silicon Valley paranoids. Biometric scanners, a 12-digit mechanical combination lock, and walls thick enough to withstand a car bomb. It was supposed to be impenetrable. Now it was his prison. Try again, Wells barked at the third safecracker he'd flown in this week. This one was from Berlin, a rail-thin man with nicotine-stained fingers and a reputation for cracking Cold War-era Soviet vaults. He'd charged $20,000 just to show up. The man pressed his stethoscope to the dial, turning it with surgical precision. Sweat beaded on his forehead. After 12 minutes, he stepped back and shook his head. The mechanism is different. Custom. I need more time. Maybe 2 days with the right equipment. I don't have 2 days. Wells's voice cracked. Inside that safe sat more than $200 million in bearer bonds, cryptocurrency keys, offshore account numbers, and stock certificates. But more importantly, more dangerously, it held documents that could never see daylight. Tax records that didn't match his public filings. Contracts with shell companies in the Caymans. Proof of the creative accountant that had made his real estate empire appear legitimate. And he couldn't remember the goddamn combination. It had been a stupid mistake. The kind that happened when you mix Macallan 25 with sleeping pills after closing a $90 million deal. He'd opened the safe that night. He vaguely remembered that much. To store the new acquisition papers. But the numbers he'd spun on that dial had evaporated from his mind like morning fog. His fingerprint scanner had malfunctioned 2 months ago, and he'd been too busy to get it fixed, relying on a mechanical backup. Now that laziness was strangling him. The German safecracker packed his tools. I will invoice you for my time. Wells barely heard him leave. He sank into his leather chair, staring at the safe as if he could force it open through sheer will. 6 days. 6 days of expert after expert, each one failing, each one collecting their fee and disappearing. The FBI had a specialist. He couldn't call them. His insurance company would ask questions he couldn't answer. His board of directors was already suspicious about the delayed quarterly reports. A soft knock interrupted his spiral. "What?" he snapped. The door cracked open. Paige Dillon slipped inside, carrying a silver tray with coffee and toast. She was 42 but looked older, worn down by 16-hour shifts and the weight of raising a child alone on a housekeeper's salary. Her uniform was pressed and spotless, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. She'd worked for Wells for 8 years, ever since her husband died and left her with a mountain of medical debt and a toddler to feed. "Your breakfast, Mr. Stevenson." He waved dismissively. "Just leave it." She set the tray on his desk, her movements careful and quiet. Years of working for Wells had taught her to be invisible, to anticipate his moods, to absorb his casual cruelties without flinching. He'd called her the help. So often she'd stopped hearing her own name. He'd docked her pay for imaginary infractions, a towel folded wrong, a window not quite clean enough, and she'd taken it because she had no choice. Jobs for single mothers without college degrees didn't grow on trees in Connecticut. "Will you need anything else?" she asked. Wells looked at her then, really looked at her for the first time in months. An idea was forming, terrible and desperate. "How much do I pay you?" $38,000 a year. "35, sir." "Right." He stood, began pacing. "What would you do with life-changing money, Paige? Real money. Enough to never clean another toilet." She blinked, confused. I don't understand." Wells laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. He was cracking under pressure. She realized. 6 days locked out his own wealth, and something inside him was breaking. "I'm going to make an offer," he said, his voice rising. "To everyone in this house. To everyone who hears about it. Open that safe, and I'll give you $200 million. Everything inside it. Sign it over, legal and binding." Paige stared at him. "Sir, are you feeling all right?" "I'm serious." He grabbed a piece of his personal letterhead, scrawled the offer in his jagged handwriting, signed it, dated it. There, witnessed and official. $200 million to whoever opens that goddamn safe. He shoved the paper at her. "You want to try? Go ahead. Spin away. Maybe you'll get lucky." The mockery in his voice was acid. He knew she had no idea how to crack a safe. None of them did. Not his driver, not his chef, not the landscaping crew. This was theater, a gesture born of exhaustion and fury. He'd already decided to call the manufacturer in Zurich tomorrow, have them fly in the original engineers to drill it open. But tonight, he needed to feel like he'd tried everything. Paige took the paper with trembling hands. "I couldn't possibly." "What's going on?" They both turned. Standing in the doorway was Malachi Dillon, Paige's 10-year-old son. He wore a faded Captain America t-shirt and jeans with worn knees, his backpack still slung over one shoulder. He must have just gotten home from school. The boy was small for his age, quiet and watchful, with his mother's dark eyes and a mind that never seemed to stop working. Wells had always found a child unsettling, the way Malachi would observe everything without speaking, soaking up conversations and details like a sponge. Too smart for his own good, Wells thought. The kind of kid who grew up asking dangerous questions. "Nothing that concerns you," Wells said coldly. "Tell your mother to take you home." But Malachi was staring at the safe, his expression unreadable. And in that moment, something shifted, though none of them knew it yet. The next 60 seconds would change everything. Malachi stepped further into the study, his sneakers silent on the Persian rug. Paige reached for his shoulder, her instinct to pull him back, to shield him from Wells's volatile mood. But the boy moved past her outstretched hand, his gaze fixed on a titanium safe. "I can open it," Malachi said quietly. The words hung in the air like smoke. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Then Wells laughed, a sharp, ugly sound that echoed off the mahogany panel walls. "You?" He looked at Paige, then back at the child, his amusement curdling into something meaner. "Your son thinks he's a safecracker now? What? Did he learn that on YouTube between homework assignments?" "Malachi, sweetheart, we should go," Paige began. "I watched you open it," Malachi interrupted, still looking at Wells. 6 nights ago. Thursday. You came in at 11:43 p.m. You were on the phone with someone named Richard, talking about the Stanford property. You opened the safe while you were talking. I was in the hallway. Mama asked me to bring you fresh towels for the guest bathroom. Wells's smile faltered. He had been on the phone that night. He vaguely remembered the conversation, the triumph of finally closing the Stanford deal after 9 months of negotiations. But he hadn't seen anyone in the hallway, hadn't noticed a small figure standing in the shadows with an armful of Egyptian cotton. "You're lying," Wells said flatly. "You spun left 3 times to 47. Malachi continued, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Then right twice to 23. Then left once to 91. Then right to 15. The door opened and you put in a brown folder and a silver USB drive. The color drained from Wells's face. The USB drive. He forgot about that completely. It contained encryption keys for his offshore accounts, the ones even his lawyers didn't know about. And the brown folder held the real estate contracts that showed the actual purchase prices, not the inflated numbers he reported for tax purposes. How could you possibly? Wells's voice trailed off. He has a photographic memory, Paige said softly, a mixture of pride and fear in her voice. Eidetic, the school psychologist called it. He remembers everything he sees, every word he reads, every number, every face, every... I don't care what some public school psychologist called it. Wells snapped, but his mind was racing. Could it be true? Could this child, this dismissed, invisible presence he'd barely acknowledged in 8 years, actually hold the key to his salvation? He looked at Malachi more carefully now. The boy stood perfectly still, his posture straight, despite the heavy backpack. His eyes were clear and calm, not the shifty nervousness of a child making up stories for attention. There was something unsettling in that steady gaze, an intelligence that seemed too old for his small frame. Wells had built his fortune on reading people, on knowing when someone was bluffing, and every instinct told him the boy wasn't lying. "Fine," Wells said abruptly. "You want to play hero? Go ahead. Open it." The mockery was back in his voice, armor against the creeping hope he couldn't afford to feel. "Your mother has my written promise. $200 million if you succeed. But when you fail, and you will fail, I never want to see you in this house again. Either of you. Mr. Stevenson, please." Paige started, but Malachi was already moving toward the safe. The boy set his backpack down carefully, unzipped it, and pulled out a small notebook and pencil. He wrote something down, the numbers he'd recited, Paige realized, and then approached the safe as if it were a math problem to be solved rather than a $300,000 fortress. "Wait," Wells said sharply. He pulled out his phone, started recording. "If this is happening, I want proof. Date and timestamp." He glanced at his page Phillip. 2:47 p.m., October 15th. Then he noticed two of the technical crew still packing up the Germans' equipment in the corner. "You two, come here. Be witnesses." The technicians, a young woman named Sasha Gates and an older man called Pete, exchanged glances but moved closer. Sasha pulled out her own phone, started filming from a different angle. Something about the moment felt important, the kind of thing you'd want documented. Malachi stood before the safe, barely tall enough to reach the dial comfortably. He had to rise on his toes slightly, his small hand reaching for the brushed titanium circle. Up close, the mechanism looked even more intimidating. Precision machined, each number etched with laser precision. "Go on then," Wells said, his voice dripping with false encouragement. "Show us this miraculous memory of yours." The boy closed his eyes for a moment, and Paige saw his lips move slightly, rehearsing the sequence one more time in his mind. Then he opened his eyes and placed his fingers on the dial. Left, 3 full rotations, smooth and deliberate, until the line aligned with 47. Wells's breath caught. That was right. That was actually right. Right. 2 rotations. The dial spun in Malachi's small hand, coming to rest at 23. "Jesus Christ," Pete muttered, his camera phone still recording. Left, 1 rotation. To 91. Wells took a step forward without meaning to, his heart hammering against his ribs. This couldn't be happening. A child, a 10-year-old child he'd barely spoken to in 8 years, couldn't possibly. Right. To 15. The mechanical click was the loudest sound Paige had ever heard. Malachi pulled the handle, and the vault door, 3 inches of titanium and carbon fiber, designed to resist blowtorches and diamond drills, swung open as smooth as silk. Inside, stacks of bearer bonds gleamed in the overhead light, cash in neat bundles. The brown folder, exactly where Malachi had said it would be, and there, on the top shelf, the silver USB drive. The room went absolutely silent. Malachi turned around, his face showing no triumph, just a quiet satisfaction of a job completed. "It's open," he said simply. Wells stared at the boy, then at the safe, then back at the boy, his mouth open and closed soundlessly. And then something inside him snapped. The transformation happened in seconds. Wells's face went from shock to a deep, mottled red that started at his collar and spread upward like spilled wine. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, tendons standing out like cables under his skin. The gratitude that should have flooded him, relief, joy, salvation, never came. Instead, there was only rage, because a child had beaten him. A black child, the son of his housekeeper. "You little thief," Wells hissed. Paige stepped forward instinctively, putting herself between her son and the billionaire. "Mr. Stevenson, he did what you asked. He set this up." Wells's voice cracked like a whip. "You both did. You broke into my study, tried the combination until you got it right, and now you're running some kind of con." "That's not true," Malachi said, his voice small but steady. "I just remembered. Shut up. Wells lunged forward, and before Paige could react, his hand shot out and grabbed Malachi's shirt, yanking the boy forward so violently that his feet left the ground. You think you can steal from me? You think I'm going to hand over $200 million because of some trick? Let him go. Paige screamed, clawing at Wells's arm. But the man was 6'3" and propelled by pure fury. He shook Malachi like a doll, the boy's head snapping back and forth. Mr. Stevenson, stop. Sasha shouted from across the room, her phone still recording, capturing every second. Wells shoved Malachi away with such force that the boy stumbled backward into his mother. They both crashed against the bookshelf, Paige's shoulder hitting the edge with a sickening crack. Books rained down around them, leather-bound first editions worth thousands of dollars, now scattered like garbage. You people are all the same, Wells snarled, advancing on them. His face was twisted into something inhuman, all the carefully maintained veneer of respectability stripped away. Always looking for a handout, always trying to take what doesn't belong to you. Well, I've got news for you. That paper I signed, that was a joke. You think any judge in Connecticut would hold me to a contract with child? Pete moved to intervene, but Wells spun on him. Don't even think about it. You're fired. Both of you. Get out of my house before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. We're contracted through the security company. Pete started. I don't care. Out! Malachi was crying now, quiet tears streaming down his face as he pressed against his mother. Paige held him with one arm while clutching her injured shoulder with the other, her own face wet with tears of rage and helplessness. 8 years. 8 years of swallowing insults, of accepting late paychecks and random accusations, of cleaning up after this man's excesses. And now he'd put his hands on her son. We're leaving, she said, her voice shaking but determined. Come on, baby. Yes, leave. Well spat. And don't bother coming back. You're fired. Both of you are banned from this property. If I see you anywhere near my home, I'll have you arrested for attempted extortion. He grabbed the paper he'd written his promise on, the paper that said $200 million, signed and dated, and ripped it into pieces, throwing them at Paige like confetti. That's what your little scheme is worth. Paige gathered Malachi's backpack with trembling hands, keeping her body between her son and Wells. The boy's face was pressed into her side, his small frame shaking with sobs. She'd never heard him cry like this. Malachi was always so quiet, so controlled, so careful not to show weakness. But something had broken in him, some fundamental sense that the world made sense or that fairness existed. I'm sorry, Mama, Malachi whispered as they moved toward the door. I'm sorry, I thought. Chill, baby. It's not your fault. None of this is your fault. They were almost out of the study when Wells's voice followed them, dripping with venom. Hey, Paige, good luck finding another job. I'll make sure every household in Greenwich knows what kind of con artist you are. You and your little. He used a word, a slur so casual and cutting that it stopped Paige in her tracks. She'd heard it before, of course, whispered by drunk guests at Wells's parties, muttered by delivery drivers who thought she couldn't hear, but never directly, never from her employer, in front of witnesses, with such naked contempt. Sasha gasped. Pete's face went gray. Even in their years working high-end security installations, they'd seen wealthy people at their worst, but this crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Paige didn't turn around. She just kept walking, pulling Malachi with her through the marble hallway, past the crystal chandelier that she cleaned just yesterday, past the imported Italian furniture that she'd polished with lemon oil every Monday for 8 years, past the life she'd built here, as small and precarious as it was. Behind them, they heard Wells shouting at the technicians. I want every piece of equipment out of here in 10 minutes. And if I hear one word about what happened today, one word, I'll bury your company in lawsuits until you're bankrupt. Do you understand me? Sasha and Pete didn't answer. They were too busy making sure their phones had uploaded the footage to the cloud. Outside, the October afternoon was crisp and clear, the kind of fall day that belonged in a painting. Paige's 12-year-old Honda Civic sat in the staff parking area, looking shabby next to Wells' collection of luxury vehicles. The Bentley, the Tesla, the vintage Porsche he drove on weekends. She got Malachi buckled into the back seat, her shoulders screaming with pain. The boy had stopped crying but sat frozen, staring at nothing. In the rearview mirror, Paige could see the mansion looming behind them, all glass and stone and ostentatious wealth. She'd just lost her job, her income, her health insurance. She had maybe $3,000 in savings and rent due in 2 weeks. But as she started the car and pulled away from the estate for the last time, one thought kept circling through her mind. Someone had recorded everything. The apartment felt smaller than usual that evening. Paige sat at their cramped kitchen table, a bag of frozen peas pressed against her swelling shoulder, watching Malachi pick at the spaghetti she'd made from their dwindling pantry supplies. He hadn't spoken since they had left Wells's estate 3 hours ago. He just sat there, pushing noodles around his plate, his eyes red-rimmed and distant. Their apartment was a one-bedroom in Stamford, 40 minutes from Greenwich's mansions, a world away in every sense that mattered. Paige slept on the pull-out couch so Malachi could have the bedroom. The walls were thin enough to hear the neighbor's television. The bathroom faucet had dripped for 6 months because she couldn't afford a plumber. But it was theirs, and it was clean, and until today she'd been managing to keep them afloat. Now she had nothing. "Mama?" Malachi's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, baby? Are we going to be okay?" Paige set down the frozen peas and reached across the table, taking his small hand in hers. His fingers were still ink-stained from school, from whatever math problems or science notes he'd been taking in that notebook he carried everywhere. Such a smart boy. Too smart, maybe. Smart enough to think he could fix everything, to solve his mother's problems with that remarkable memory of his. "We're going to be fine," she said, trying to make her voice sound certain. "I'll find another job." Mrs. Chun at the church said the Riverside Hotel is hiring for their housekeeping staff. The pay's not as good, but... "He hurt you." Malachi's voice cracked. "He grabbed me and he hurt you, and he said those things, and he's just going to get away with it. Because he's rich and we're not." Paige had no answer for that. What could she say? That the world was fair? That justice existed for people like them? She'd spent 10 years since her husband's death learning exactly how the world worked. How medical bills could swallow a family whole. How employers could dock pay for imagined infractions. How landlords could raise rent whenever they pleased, and there was nothing you could do but pay or leave. Her phone buzzed on the table. A text from an unknown number. "This is a Sasha Gates from today. The technician. Please call me when you can. It's important." Paige stared at the message. Her first instinct was to delete it. Wells had threatened lawsuits, and she couldn't afford to get dragged into legal battles. But something made her tap the number, her heart hammering as the phone rang. "Mrs. Dillon?" Sasha's voice was urgent, almost excited. "Thank God you called. Listen, you need to know something. Pete and we got everything on video. Everything. The whole thing from multiple angles with audio." Paige's throat went dry. "I don't want trouble," Mr. Stevenson said. "Mr. Stevenson is about to have more trouble than he can imagine," Sasha interrupted. "Mrs. Dillon, do you understand what we recorded? We have him assaulting a minor. We have him using racial slurs. We have him violating a written contract in front of witnesses. And..." She paused, and Paige could hear the grin in her voice. "We have clear footage of what was inside that safe. I don't understand. When your son opened it, our cameras caught everything. The documents, the USB drive, all of it. Pete used to work white-collar crime investigation before he went private sector. He recognized what he was seeing. Those weren't normal financial records, Mrs. Dillon. Those were the kind of documents people keep hidden for a reason." Paige felt the room tilt slightly. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we think Wells Stevenson has been committing tax fraud on a massive scale. Maybe money laundering, too. And now we have video evidence of him keeping those documents in a concealed safe. Evidence that would be very interesting to, say, the IRS, or the FBI, or the Connecticut Attorney General's office." The frozen peas slipped from Paige's numb fingers, landing on the table with a soft thump. "You can't, he'll destroy you. He has lawyers, he has money. He has exposure," Sasha corrected. "Pete and I have been doing this work for 6 years. We've seen what happens when rich people think they're untouchable. But here's the thing. We're not interested in blackmail. We're interested in what's right. She took a breath. Mrs. Dillon, we want to help you. We want to make sure you and Malachi get what you're owed. But we need your permission to share this footage. Malachi was watching his mother now, his eyes wide and attentive. He might be 10, but he understood the weight of this moment, the fork in the road opening before them. If we do this, Paige said slowly, if we go public with what happened, he'll come after us with everything he has. He will, Sasha agreed. It won't be easy. But Mrs. Dillon, he assaulted your son. He violated a legal contract. He used language that would get him fired from any legitimate company in America. And he's been stealing from the government, from all of us, for God knows how long. Someone has to hold him accountable. Paige looked at Malachi, at the bruise forming on his arm where Wells had grabbed him, at the defeat in his young eyes. She thought about 8 years of casual cruelty, of cutting remarks disguised as jokes, of late paychecks and stolen dignity. She thought about all the other people who'd probably suffered under Wells Stevenson's contempt, all the other families he crushed under the weight of his wealth and privilege. What do we do? She asked. Sasha's voice was steady and clear. First, we document your injuries and Malachi's. Photos, medical records if you can get them. Then we go to a lawyer. I know someone who handles employment discrimination cases, and she's fierce. Then, with your permission and legal guidance. She paused. We show the world exactly who Wells Stevenson really is. Paige closed her eyes, feeling the ache in her shoulder, the weight of 8 years finally lifting. Okay, she whispered. Let's do it. Across the table, Malachi sat up straighter, something like hope flickering in his eyes for the first time since they'd left the mansion. The fight was just beginning. The lawyer's office smelled like coffee and old books. Rebecca Torres was 53, Puerto Rican, and had a reputation for taking cases that other attorneys called unwinnable. Her walls were covered with framed news clippings, settlements against major corporations, discrimination cases that had set precedents, a photo of her shaking hands with the governor after landmark legislation passed. She wore her gray hair in a neat bun, and her expression suggested she'd heard every excuse wealthy people could offer and believed none of them. Show me the video, she said, after Paige and Malachi had finished explaining what happened. Sasha pulled out her laptop and played the footage. Rebecca watched in silence, her face impassive except for a slight tightening around her eyes when Wells grabbed Malachi, and a sharp intake of breath when he used a slur. The video ran for 12 minutes, from Malachi approaching the safe to the moment page, and her son fled the study. When it ended, Rebecca sat back in her chair and folded her hands on her desk. This man is an idiot, she said flatly. Despite everything. Paige almost laughed. What? An idiot, Rebecca repeated. Smart people who want to avoid consequences don't commit crimes in front of witnesses with cameras. They don't put written promises on company letterhead. They don't assault children while being recorded from multiple angles. She tapped her pen against the desk. Wells Stevenson thinks he's invincible. That's going to be his downfall. Can we actually make him pay what he promised? Malachi asked quietly. It was the first time he'd spoken since they'd arrived. Rebecca looked at him with something like respect. That's exactly the right question. Here's the situation. Yes, that written promise is legally binding. He made an offer. You accepted by performing the requested action, and there were multiple witnesses. The fact that you're a minor actually works in our favor. Courts take contracts with children seriously, especially when an adult is trying to renege. But he'll fight it, Paige said. He'll say it was a joke, that we coerce him somehow. He can say whatever he wants. We have video evidence proving otherwise. Rebecca leaned forward. But here's what you need to understand. The contract dispute is actually the smallest part of this case. What we're really looking at is assault, battery, workplace harassment, wrongful termination, and possible hate crime charges. The video shows Wells committing multiple crimes in the span of 10 minutes. Sasha spoke up from her seat by the window. And the documents in the safe. Pete sent screenshots to his former colleague at the FBI. They're very interested. Rebecca's eyes gleamed. Even better. If the feds get involved, Wells will be fighting on multiple fronts. Criminal charges, civil suits, IRS investigations. It adds up fast, even for a billionaire. She pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. Here's what we're going to do. First, we file a civil suit. Breach of contract, assault, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and employment discrimination. We asked for full $200 million plus damages. Paige felt lightheaded. $200 million plus? Pain and suffering, emotional trauma, medical expenses, lost wages, punitive damages. Rebecca ticked off on her fingers. And we're going to request a jury trial. Because when 12 ordinary people watch this video, when they see a billionaire assault a 10-year-old child and call his mother that word, they're going to want blood. What about the criminal charges? Pete asked. He'd been quiet until now, standing by the door like a sentinel. I have contact in the DA's office, Rebecca said. Assault on a minor is serious. Add the racial element, and it becomes a hate crime enhancement in Connecticut. That's felony territory. She looked at Paige. Are you prepared for this to get ugly? Because it will. Wells has resources. He'll hire private investigators to dig into your background. He'll leak stories to the press painting you as opportunists. He'll make you regret ever speaking up. Paige thought about the apartment with the dripping faucet, about the $3,000 in her savings account that wouldn't last through next month's rent. She thought about Malachi's bruised arm and the dead look in his eyes when Wells had called him that name. She thought about 8 years of biting her tongue, while Wells threw tantrums over minor inconveniences, living a life of obscene luxury while paying her poverty wages. Let him try, she said quietly. Rebecca smiled, a fierce, wolfish expression. Good, because there's one more thing we need to discuss. She turned her laptop around, showing a social media page. Public opinion. Wells Stevenson has carefully cultivated an image as a philanthropist. He donates to museums, sits on charity boards, gives speeches about economic opportunity. That image is his armor. We need to crack it. How? Sasha asked. We released the video, Rebecca said simply. Not all of it. We hold some back for trial. But enough to show the world who he really is. 30 seconds of him grabbing Malachi. 10 seconds of the slur. 5 seconds of Malachi opening the safe. We let people see the truth. Won't that compromise the case? Pete asked. It'll strengthen it, Rebecca countered. Public pressure is a weapon. When sponsors start pulling out, when business partners distance themselves, when his board demands his resignation, that's when people like Wells start making mistakes. That's when they get desperate and sloppy. She looked at Paige. But I need your consent. This will make you and Malachi public figures, at least temporarily. There will be attention, scrutiny, probably harassment. Are you ready for that? Paige looked down at Malachi, sitting beside her in a chair too big for his small frame. He met her eyes and nodded once, a tiny gesture of determination that reminded her so much of his father, the man who'd worked himself to exhaustion trying to provide for them, who died too young with medical bills he'd never be able to pay. Yes, Paige said. Release the video. Rebecca picked up her phone. Then let's burn his world down. The video went live at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Sasha uploaded it to 3 platforms simultaneously, YouTube, Twitter, and TikTok, with a simple caption. Billionaire Wells Stevenson promised $200 million to anyone who could open his safe. A 10-year-old boy did it in 60 seconds. This is what happened next. By midnight, it had 10,000 views. By 1 a.m., 50,000. By dawn, 2 million. The algorithm god smiled on righteousness that night, pushing the video into feeds across the country. People watched it on their phones in bed, over morning coffee, during bathroom breaks at work. They watched a small boy in a Captain America shirt spin a dial with careful precision. They watched the safe door swing open. They watched a grown man's face contort with rage instead of gratitude. And then they watched him grab a child. The internet had seen many things, had become numb to much of humanity's ugliness. But there was something about this particular cruelty, the casual violence, the vicious slur caught clearly on audio, the mother's scream as she tried to protect her son, that cut through the noise. Hashtag Pim Malachi started trending at 6:23 a.m. By 9 a.m., It was the #1 trend in the United States. Paige woke to her phone, exploding with notifications. Friend requests, messages from strangers, news outlets requesting interviews. She sat on her pull-out couch in the gray morning light, scrolling through hundreds of comments. This is disgusting. That man belongs in prison. I'm a lawyer, and that written contract is 100% legally binding. He owes that kid $200 million. The way he grabbed and made me physically sick. That baby was just trying to help. White billionaires really think they can do anything. Lock him up. My son is Malachi's age. If someone touched him like that... There were ugly comments, too, of course. Defenders of Wells claiming the video was staged. Racists crawling out of their holes to spew poison. Conspiracy theorists suggesting elaborate scams. But they were drowned out by the tidal wave of outrage. Malachi emerged from his bedroom, still in his pajamas, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Mama, why are there people outside?" Paige went to the window and pulled back the curtain. 3 news vans were parked on the street below, reporters setting up cameras on the sidewalk. A small crowd had gathered, neighbors, curious onlookers, people holding handmade signs that read "Justice of Malachi" and "Pay up Stevenson." "Oh my God," Paige whispered. Her phone rang. "Rebecca Torres." "Have you seen the news?" the lawyer asked without preamble. "I'm looking at 3 news crews outside my apartment right now. Make it 6. CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News are all covering it. Good Morning America wants you on tomorrow. So does The View." Rebecca's voice was energized, almost gleeful. "Paige, this is exactly what we wanted. Wells is getting destroyed." His Wikipedia page has already been updated to include the incident. His company's stock dropped 4% at opening bell. For percent, Paige tried to process that number. Wells Stevenson Real Estate Holdings was valued at something like $3 billion. For percent was $820 million, Rebecca supplied. And that's just the beginning. His PR team released a statement an hour ago calling the video selectively edited and claiming you're trying to extort him. It went over like a lead balloon. People are posting the full 12-minute version now. Pete sent it to a few journalists he trusts, and it's even worse for Wells. Paige sank onto the couch. This is really happening. It's really happening. And Paige, you need to prepare yourself. This is going to get bigger before it's over. She had no idea how right Rebecca was. By noon, Wells Stevenson's carefully constructed empire was crumbling in real time. The Hartford Museum of Art announced they were removing his name from their West Wing and returning his $5 million donation. The Greenwich Country Club suspended his membership pending investigation. 3 companies where he served on the board demanded his immediate resignation. His main bank, Citigroup, released a terse statement about reviewing our relationship with Mr. Stevenson in light of recent events. But the real damage came from his business partners. Richard Caldwell, the developer he'd been on the phone with the night he opened the safe, released a statement terminating their partnership on the Stanford project. "We cannot in good conscience work with someone who exhibits such reprehensible behavior," the statement read. That deal alone was worth $90 million. 2 other major investors pulled out of upcoming projects by 2 p.m. Wells' executive assistant, a woman named Jennifer who'd worked for him for 12 years, resigned via email and immediately gave an interview to the Washington Post detailing years of verbal abuse, sexual harassment, and discriminatory practices. She kept contemporaneous notes. She had emails. She had recordings. "I stayed silent because I needed the job," Jennifer said in the interview. "But watching what he did to that little boy, I couldn't anymore. I just couldn't." By 3 p.m., a former employee named Marcus Chin posted a Twitter thread documenting Wells' treatment of Asian contractors, including texts where Wells referred to them using ethnic slurs and bragged about underpaying those people because they won't complain. By 4 p.m., a former housekeeper named Rosa Martinez came forward with her own story. Wells had fired her while she was pregnant and refused to pay 2 weeks of earned wages. She'd been too afraid to sue. By 5 p.m., there were 67 similar stories flooding social media. The dam had broken. All those years of casual cruelty, of power wielded without conscience, of people too afraid or too poor to speak up. It all came pouring out in a torrent of testimony. Wells Stevenson hadn't just assaulted one child. He'd been assaulting human dignity for decades. And now, finally, someone was listening. At his mansion in Greenwich, Wells Stevenson sat in his study, the same study where this had all begun, and watched his phone light up with urgent messages from his lawyer, his publicist, his board of directors, his ex-wife's attorney, demanding increased alimony based on newly discovered assets. He'd tried calling the video platforms to demand takedowns. They'd cited public interest. He'd tried threatening Page's lawyer with defamation suits. Rebecca had laughed in his face. He'd tried holding a press conference to set the record straight. It had lasted 7 minutes before reporters started shouting questions about the racial slurs, and he'd fled. The safe stood open behind him, empty now. Federal agents had seized its contents 3 hours ago with a warrant. Tax evasion, money laundering, securities fraud. The list of potential charges ran 2 pages long. Wells poured himself 3 fingers of Macallan 25 with shaking hands and stared at his reflection in the darkening window. He'd built an empire over 30 years. It had taken 60 seconds to destroy it. The federal courthouse in New Haven was a fortress of gray granite and marble columns, built in an era when government buildings were designed to inspire awe and intimidate defendants. Wells Stevenson climbed the steps on a cold November morning, surrounded by a phalanx of lawyers in $1,000 suits, while protesters lined the sidewalks holding signs and chanting, "Pay Malachi! Pay Malachi! Pay Malachi!" The chant echoed off the stone walls, following Wells like an indictment. He kept his head down, his face hidden behind expensive sunglasses, but he could feel their anger like heat from a furnace. Someone threw an egg that splattered against his bodyguard's shoulder. Someone else shouted a curse that made even his lawyers flinch. 3 weeks had passed since the video went viral. 3 weeks that had felt like 3 years. The IRS had frozen his accounts while they conducted their audit. The SEC was investigating potential securities fraud. The Connecticut Attorney General had filed criminal charges: assault in the second degree, risk of injury to a minor, intimidation based on bigotry, and breach of peace. Each carried potential prison time. But today was about the civil suit. Today, Rebecca Torres was asking a judge to enforce the contract and award Page Dillon the $200 million Wells had promised. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled, spectators lining the walls, sketch artists in the front row since cameras weren't allowed inside. Page sat at the plaintiff's table with Rebecca, wearing a simple navy dress that Rebecca had helped her pick out. Malachi sat in the gallery with Sasha and Pete, his small face serious and watchful. Wells refused to look at them. Judge Marion Hendricks entered, a black woman in her 60s with silver hair and a reputation for no-nonsense jurisprudence. She'd been on the bench for 23 years and had presided over some of Connecticut's most high-profile cases. Wells's legal team had tried to get her accused, claiming bias. She denied the motion with barely concealed contempt. "We're here for the matter of Dillon versus Stevenson," Judge Hendricks said, settling into her chair. "I've reviewed the filings from both parties. Mr. Stevenson's counsel, I understand you're arguing this contract is invalid." Wells's lead attorney, a man named Preston Whitmore from one of Manhattan's white shoe firms, stood smoothly. "Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff is a minor who cannot legally enter into contracts. Furthermore, my client's written statement was made under duress and without serious intent, a joke, essentially, made during a moment of extreme stress." "A joke," Judge Hendricks repeated, her tone flat. "Mr. Whitmore, I've watched the video evidence multiple times. Your client appeared quite serious when he made that offer. He put it in writing. He signed it. He dated it. He had witnesses present. At what point does this become legally binding in your view?" Whitmore shifted slightly. "Your Honor, the disproportion of the offer itself. $200 million for opening a safe demonstrates it couldn't have been serious. No reasonable person would. No reasonable person would forget the combination to their own safe." Judge Hendricks interrupted. "No reasonable person would fail to crack it for 6 days despite hiring multiple experts. No reasonable person would then assault a child who successfully performed the requested task. Yet here we are. She turned to Rebecca. Ms. Torres, your position? Rebecca stood, and Paige felt a surge of confidence just watching her. This woman was a warrior. Your Honor, the law is clear. My client's son performed exactly as requested. The offer was made in writing, with multiple witnesses, and captured on video. Mr. Stevenson's subjective intent is irrelevant. What matters is whether a reasonable person in Malachi Dillon's position would believe the offer was genuine. Given the context, a desperate man who'd been locked out of his safe for nearly a week, who'd spent hundreds of thousands on failed experts. Yes, absolutely, any reasonable person would believe he was serious. The plaintiff is 10 years old, Whitmore objected. How could we apply a reasonable person standard to a child? Because contract law doesn't require the offeree be an adult, only that they accept the offer by performing the requested action. Rebecca shot back. Minors enter into binding contracts all the time, especially when an adult has made an offer that the minor then fulfills. Mr. Stevenson could have withdrawn his offer at any time before Malachi touched that dial. He didn't. In fact, he encouraged the child to try on camera with witnesses. Judge Hendricks made a note. What about the defendant's argument regarding duress? He was under duress from his own poor decisions, Rebecca said. That's not legal duress. Legal duress requires wrongful threats or coercion from the other party. Malachi Dillon made no threats. He simply offered to help. And was subsequently assaulted for his trouble, Judge Hendricks added. She looked at Whitmore. Counselor, I'm going to be frank. Your client's behavior after the safe was opened is troubling. Even if I were inclined to void this contract on technical grounds, the assault, the slurs, the wrongful termination of Ms. Dillon, these create independent causes of action that complicate your defense considerably. Whitmore's jaw tightened. Your Honor, we're prepared to offer a settlement. I'm not interested in settlement, Paige said suddenly, her voice cutting across the courtroom. Rebecca touched her arm gently, a reminder to let the lawyers handle it. But Judge Hendricks held up a hand. Ms. Dillon, you're not represented by counsel at this moment? I am, Your Honor, but... Paige stood, her heart hammering. I want to say something, if that's allowed. Judge Hendricks studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Proceed. Paige turned to face Wells for the first time since that terrible afternoon. He still wouldn't meet her eyes, staring instead at the table in front of him like it held the answers to all his problems. I worked for you for 8 years, Paige said, her voice shaking but clear. I cleaned your house. I washed your clothes. I cooked your food. I arranged your parties and covered for you when you were too drunk to remember what you'd promised your guests. I did everything you asked and more, and you paid me poverty wages. You docked my pay for imaginary mistakes. You made me work through my lunch breaks and stay late without overtime. Your Honor, this is hardly relevant. Whitmore began. I'll decide what's relevant. Judge Hendricks said sharply. Continue, Ms. Dillon. I stayed because I had a son to feed, Paige continued. Because I had rent to pay and medical bills for my husband's death. Because I didn't have choices. And you knew that. You knew I was trapped, and you used it against me every single day. Her voice broke slightly. But my son, my beautiful, brilliant boy, he tried to help you. Even after years of watching you treat me like I was nothing, he tried to help, and you hurt him for it. Now she looked at Judge Hendricks. So no, I'm not interested in the settlement. I want the $200 million he promised. And I want everyone to know that contracts matter, that words matter, that you can't just assault children and use slurs and walk away because you're rich. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Judge Hendricks set down her pen. Thank you, Ms. Dillon. You may be seated. She looked at both legal teams. I'm going to take a brief recess to review the case law. We'll reconvene in 30 minutes. As she left the bench, Wells finally looked up at Paige. The hatred in his eyes was scorching. The recess stretched to 45 minutes. Paige spent it in a small conference room down the hall, drinking weak courthouse coffee and trying not to throw up from nerves. Rebecca sat across from her, reviewing notes, while Malachi waited in the hallway with Sasha and Pete. Through the small window in the door, Paige could see her son sitting quietly, his legs dangling from the bench, too short to reach the floor. Did I mess things up? Paige asked, speaking out like that. Rebecca looked up, her expression thoughtful. You spoke from the heart. Judges are human beings, Paige. They respond to truth. She paused. But I need you to prepare yourself for the possibility that Hendricks might rule against us on the contract. It's a long shot. The law is on our side, but Wells has powerful friends, and $200 million is a staggering amount. Then what? Then we appeal, and we pursue the other claims: assault, wrongful termination, emotional distress. We have damages there too, just not as dramatic. Rebecca leaned forward. But Paige, I want you to think about something. Even if we lose today, we've already won in a bigger sense. Wells Stevenson's reputation is destroyed. He's facing criminal charges. The IRS is auditing him back 10 years. His business partners have abandoned him. That's not nothing. It's not $200 million. Paige said quietly. No, Rebecca agreed. It's not. A bailiff knocked on the door. Judge is ready. They filed back into the courtroom, and Paige felt the weight of every eye following her. The gallery had filled even more during the recess. Reporters, activists, curious citizens who managed to get seats. She found Malachi's face in the crowd and drew strength from a small, encouraging nod. Judge Hendricks entered, her expression unreadable. Everyone rose, then sat again at her gesture. The rustle of fabric and whispered conversations died to silence. I've reviewed the relevant case law, Judge Hendricks began, as well as the video evidence and testimony. This is, without question, an unusual case. The amount in question is extraordinary. The circumstances are bizarre, and the defendant's behavior after the contract was allegedly fulfilled is reprehensible. She paused. But my personal feelings about Mr. Stevenson's character are not the basis for this ruling. The law is. Paige's stomach dropped. That sounded like the beginning of bad news. Connecticut contract law is clear. The judge continued. An offer becomes binding when it is accepted through performance of the requested act. Intent matters only insofar as a reasonable person would understand the offer to be genuine. Here, we have several factors. First, a written offer signed and dated. Second, multiple witnesses who can testify to the circumstances. Third, video evidence showing Mr. Stevenson explicitly inviting the minor to attempt opening the safe. Fourth, the desperate context. 6 days of failed attempts by paid experts. She looked directly at Wells. Mr. Stevenson, you made this offer in front of witnesses and on camera. You invited a 10-year-old child to try. You did not specify that the offer was hypothetical or conditional. You did not withdraw the offer before performance began. And most damningly, your behavior after the safe was opened, assaulting the child and using racial slurs, suggests you understood the offer was real and enforceable, and you were trying to intimidate the family into not pursuing their rights. Whitmore started to object, but Judge Hendricks silenced him with a look. The court finds that the contract was valid and binding, she said. Mr. Stevenson is hereby ordered to pay Malachi Dillon the sum of $200 million within 30 days. The courtroom erupted. Paige heard the words but couldn't process them. $200 million. $200 million. For a moment, she thought she might faint. Rebecca gripped her hand under the table, squeezing hard enough to hurt, grounding her. Furthermore, Judge Hendricks continued, raising her voice over the noise. The court awards Ms. Paige Dillon an additional $3 million in damages for assault, battery, wrongful termination, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Mr. Stevenson's behavior was not merely negligent, but willfully cruel, and this court will not allow such conduct to go unpunished. Wells was on his feet now, his face purple with rage. This is a travesty. You're letting these people rob me. Mr. Stevenson, you will sit down and be silent, or I will hold you in contempt. Judge Hendricks snapped. You made a promise. A child fulfilled it. You owe him that money. That's how contracts work, regardless of your wealth or your feelings about the parties involved. Your Honor, we will appeal, Whitmore began. You have that right, the judge acknowledged. But in the meantime, I'm ordering Mr. Stevenson to post a bond for the full amount to ensure the plaintiffs can collect if the appeal fails. And given his history of attempting to intimidate these plaintiffs, I'm also issuing a restraining order. Mr. Stevenson, you are to stay at least 500 feet away from Ms. Dillon and her son at all times." She banged her gavel. This court is adjourned. The gallery exploded into chaos. Reporters rushing for the doors, spectators cheering, Wells's legal team huddling around him in furious consultation. Paige sat frozen, unable to move, barely able to breathe. Rebecca turned to her, and there were tears in the lawyer's eyes. "We won," she said simply. "Paige, we won." And then Malachi was there, somehow having slipped past the bailiffs, throwing himself into his mother's arms. Paige held him tight, feeling his small body shake with sobs. Not sadness this time, but a relief so profound it was almost painful. "We're going to be okay, baby," she whispered into his hair. "We're going to be okay." Behind them, Wells Stevenson was being escorted from the courtroom by a security team, his face a mask of impotent fury. He looked back once, his eyes finding Paige's across the chaos. She met his gaze steadily, without fear. She'd won. Outside the courthouse, the November sun broke through the clouds as Paige emerged with Malachi, Rebecca, Sasha, and Pete. The crowd of supporters erupted in cheers, chanting Malachi's name. Reporters surged forward with cameras and microphones, shouting questions. "Ms. Dillon, how does it feel to win $200 million? Malachi, what will you do with the money? Do you have a message for Wells Stevenson?" Rebecca stepped forward, raising her hand for quiet. "Ms. Dillon will make a brief statement." Paige looked down at Malachi, who nodded encouragement. She stepped up to the microphone someone had thrust toward her, her voice shaking but clear. "I want to thank Judge Hendricks for her courage and fairness. I want to thank Rebecca Torres for fighting for us when nobody else would. And I want to say something to everyone watching. This isn't just about money. This is about dignity. This is about standing up to people who think their wealth makes them untouchable. This is about teaching our children that justice is possible, even when it seems impossible." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "My son is the smartest, bravest person I know. He has a gift, an incredible memory, and he used it to help someone who'd been nothing but cruel to us. And that man hurt him for it. But today, the law said that matters. Today, the law said you can't hurt children and walk away. Today, the law said promises mean something." Her voice grew stronger. "We're going to use this money to help other families like ours. Families who've been exploited, discriminated against, pushed down by people with more power and money. We're starting a foundation, the Malachi Dillon Justice Fund, to provide legal representation for workers who can't afford it, because everyone deserves dignity. Everyone deserves justice." The crowd roared its approval. "What about forgiveness?" one reporter called out. "Would you ever forgive Wells Stevenson?" Paige considered the question for a long moment. If he ever shows genuine remorse, if he apologizes, if he tries to make amends, if he changes, then maybe. But forgiveness isn't something you can demand. It's something you have to earn. She looked directly into the nearest camera. And Mr. Stevenson hasn't even tried. 15 months later, Paige stood in the sunlit lobby of the Malachi Dillon Justice Center, watching workers hang the last piece of signage above the reception desk. The building was a renovated factory in Bridgeport. Nothing ostentatious. Nothing like Wells's marble mansion, but solid and dignified and theirs. 6 floors of legal offices, conference rooms, a law library, and a community space for workshops and support groups. The transformation had been remarkable. After Judge Hendricks' ruling, Wells had tried everything to avoid paying. He'd filed appeals, claimed bankruptcy protection, attempted to hide assets in offshore accounts that the IRS promptly seized. But Rebecca Torres had been relentless, and the public pressure never let up. Every delay tactic made headlines. Every legal maneuver brought fresh outrage. Companies that still did business with Wells found themselves targets of boycotts. His remaining properties were picketed. His social media was flooded with thousands of people demanding he pay what he owed. In the end, his own desperation had destroyed him. Federal investigators, armed with the evidence from inside the safe, had built an airtight case. Tax evasion going back 12 years. money laundering through shell corporations, securities fraud. The numbers were staggering. Wells had hidden over $400 million from the IRS alone. Faced with potential decades in prison, he'd taken a plea deal, 15 years in federal prison, full payment of the judgment to Malachi, restitution to government, and forfeiture of most of his remaining assets. The $200 million had been transferred to a trust in Malachi's name 6 months ago. Another $3 million to Page. Wells Stevenson, once worth an estimated $2.8 billion, was left with virtually nothing. He was currently serving his sentence at FCI Danbury, a low-security facility 90 minutes away. Page had received 3 letters from him in the past year. She'd read the first one, a rambling, self-pitying screed that blamed everyone but himself, and burned it. The other 2 remained unopened in a drawer. Some things didn't deserve forgiveness. "Mama, come look at this." Malachi's voice echoed from the second floor. He was 11 now, taller, his face losing some of its little boy roundness. But his eyes still held that same watchful intelligence, that gift for seeing and remembering everything. Page climbed the stairs to find him standing in what would be the children's resource room, a bright space with books, computers, and games designed to keep kids occupied while their parents met with lawyers downstairs. "Ms. Torres said we could put whatever we want in here," Malachi said, gesturing around. "I was thinking maybe a wall of photos, like people we've helped, so kids can see that things get better." Paige felt her throat tighten. Her son, who could have become bitter and angry after what Wells did to him, had instead become more compassionate, more determined to help others. They'd spent months in therapy together, processing the trauma, and Dr. Chen had marveled at Malachi's resilience. "That's a beautiful idea, baby." They'd helped 63 families so far, even before the center officially opened. Workers who'd been cheated out of wages, tenants facing illegal evictions, immigrants targeted by predatory landlords. Rebecca had recruited 8 other attorneys to the cause, all working at reduced rates or pro bono, funded by the foundation. The goal was to handle 200 cases in the first year. The official opening was tomorrow, a ribbon-cutting ceremony that the governor would attend, along with news crews and community leaders. But tonight was just for them. Paige, Malachi, Rebecca, Sasha, and Pete, who'd all become something like family over the past year. They ordered pizza and ate it sitting on folding chairs in the empty lobby, talking and laughing as the sun set outside the tall windows. "I got an email from Jennifer," Rebecca said, scrolling through her phone. Jennifer was Wells's former assistant, the woman whose testimony had been devastating at his criminal trial. She's enrolled in law school, wants to specialize in employment law, says watching this case inspired her. "That's wonderful," Paige said. "And Marcus Chun, the contractor Wells discriminated against, he won his civil suit. $2 million in damages. He's using it to start a nonprofit that helps minority-owned construction businesses navigate contracts and avoid exploitation." Sasha raised her soda can in a toast to the domino effect of justice. They all drank to that. "What about Wells?" Pete asked quietly. "Anyone heard how he's doing inside?" Paige shook her head. "I don't want to know. That part of my life is over." But Malachi was looking at her with those 2 wise eyes. "Is it though, Mama? I mean, he's still in your head sometimes. I can tell." She should have known she couldn't hide anything from him. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Sometimes I think about that afternoon, and I get angry all over again. Angry at what he did to you. Angry at all the years I wasted being afraid of him." "But you're not afraid anymore," Malachi said. It wasn't a question. "No," Paige agreed. "I'm not afraid anymore." The conversation drifted to logistics, furniture deliveries, staff training schedules, the interview requests that still came in regularly. Paige had done a segment on 60 Minutes. Malachi had been featured in Time Magazine's Most Influential Kids issue. They'd been invited to speak at conferences in schools and community centers across the country. The attention was sometimes overwhelming, but they'd learned to navigate it together. And they'd been careful with the money, investing most of it, living comfortably but not extravagantly in a modest 3-bedroom house in Norwalk. Malachi still went to public school, Paige still cooked dinner most nights. They'd kept the things that mattered. As midnight approached, Rebecca stood to leave. Big day tomorrow. Everyone should get some sleep. She hugged Paige tightly. You know I'm proud of you, right? What you've built here, what you become, it's extraordinary. We built it together, Paige corrected. No, Rebecca said firmly. You had the courage to stand up. You had the strength to fight back. I just showed you where the weapons were. After everyone left, Paige and Malachi walked through the empty building one last time, turning off lights, checking locks. Their footsteps echoed in the quiet spaces that tomorrow would be full of voices, of people seeking help, of hope being rebuilt one case at a time. Mama? Malachi said as they reached the front door. Do you think what happened to us, all the bad stuff, do you think it happened for a reason? Paige considered the question carefully. She'd never been one for platitudes about divine plans or everything happening for a reason. Bad things happened because people made bad choices, because systems were broken, because the world was often cruel and unfair. I don't think it happened for a reason, she said finally, but I think we gave it meaning. We took something terrible and turned it into something good. That's not fate, baby. That's choice. Malachi nodded slowly, processing this. Then he smiled. A real smile, the kind she'd been afraid she might never see again after that awful day in Wells' study. I like that better anyway. They stepped out into the cool March evening. Spring was coming to Connecticut, bringing with it the promise of renewal and growth. Tomorrow, the Malachi Dillon Justice Center would open its doors. Tomorrow, they would start helping families who needed it. Tomorrow, they would prove that the powerful could be held accountable, that justice wasn't just for the wealthy, that a small boy's memory and a mother's love could change the world. But tonight, they were just themselves, Paige and Malachi Dillon, walking to their car under a sky full of stars, carrying with them the knowledge that they had survived, that they had won, that they had transformed their pain into purpose. Wells Stevenson had tried to break them with his cruelty. Instead, they had broken his empire and built something better from the ruins. As they drove home through the quiet streets, Paige glanced in the rearview mirror at her son, already dozed in the back seat, his head resting against the window. This brilliant, brave, beautiful child who cracked a safe in 60 seconds and changed both their lives forever. She thought about the question that reporter had asked on the courthouse steps. What's your message for Wells Stevenson? She'd answered diplomatically that day, talking about remorse and amends. But if she were honest, completely, brutally honest, her message would be simpler. You tried to make us invisible. You tried to make us less than human. You tried to use your wealth and power to escape the consequences of your actions. And you failed. Because in the end, justice didn't care about your bank account. Truth didn't care about your lawyers. And a mother's love for a child was stronger than any vault you could build. The safe had been worth $300,000. The combination had been priceless. And the lesson, that dignity and justice were worth fighting for, no matter the cost, would echo far beyond one courtroom, one case, one small boy's courage. Paige pulled into their driveway, the porch light welcoming them home. She gently woke Malachi, who stumbled sleepily into the house and headed straight for bed. She followed him upstairs, tucked him in like she had every night of his life, and kissed his forehead. Love you, Mama, he mumbled, already half asleep. Love you too, baby. Forever and always. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him breathe, this child who'd been underestimated and dismissed and hurt, but who'd emerged stronger and more compassionate than seemed possible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be more families to help, more injustices to fight, more systems to change. The work would never be finished. Not really. But tonight, in this moment, they had won. And that was enough. Paige turned off the light and headed to her own room, ready to rest before the next chapter began. Behind her in the darkness, Malachi Dillon slept peacefully, dreaming of a world where safes opened not with combinations of numbers, but with combinations of courage, truth, and an unshakable belief that everyone, regardless of their race, their wealth, or their station in life, deserved dignity. The billionaire had mocked him. The child had prevailed. And justice, for once, had won. The Malachi Dillon Justice Center opened its doors on March 15th and served over 400 families in its first year of operation. Paige Dillon became a sought-after advocate for workers' rights and testified before Congress on employment discrimination reform. Malachi Dillon graduated as valedictorian of his high school class and is currently studying law at Yale University, with plans to return to the Justice Center after graduation. Wells Stevenson was denied early parole and remains incarcerated. He has never apologized.
From the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for tuning in and watching this video. You being here is the best encouragement I could ask for. The simplest and best way to show your support and tell me you want to see more content is to like this video and subscribe to the channel. That's your way of sending me love. I don't want the adventure to stop yet, though. To enjoy more thrilling videos, go ahead and click the next video thumbnail you see right now. Enjoy and thanks again.